Miranda sat on the floor of the dimly lit bathroom, peering down into a silver hand mirror. She turned her head to view her profile, the palish light from a solitary candle casting foreboding shadows over her face. Miranda had never liked her own face very much. She wished instead that she resembled her mother, or perhaps her sister Samantha, blonde and glowing. Miranda would turn 18 next week, and the month after graduate from high school. She frowned as black strands fell across her eyes and brushed them aside, her hair framing her oval face in a neatly cut veil. Miranda had been sitting on the bathroom floor almost since her classmate Veronica had left, gazing into the mirror she had found in her mother's dresser drawer. "Really, just stare into the mirror," Veronica had told her, "and ask for Jane. Wait a bit, and then say something like, 'Jane, will I ever get married?' Or, 'Jane, will I ever fall in love?'" Veronica paused for a moment and raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Jane might even show you her frightening face after answering and ask, 'Do you think I'm pretty?' Don't hesitate. You'd better say yes right away." Miranda leaned forward at the kitchen table and rested her arms across her textbook. "You're just trying to scare me," she said in an annoyed voice. "I don't believe a word of it." Veronica held up both hands in protest and smiled again, this time breaking out into a broad grin. "My sister, Melissa? She swears it's all true. A friend of a friend told her the story. Says it happened at the friend of a friend's cousin's school all those years back. But why don't you just find out for yourself?" Standing up from her seat at the table, Veronica looked around the kitchen. "I would use a hand mirror, as you can just drop it if she shows you her ugly mug. Seeing creepy Jane's face in the bathroom mirror would be way too scary." Miranda had expected a quiet evening at home preparing for final exams, but Veronica quickly began teasing her about boys. Dateless throughout high school, Miranda was set to begin college without ever having had a boyfriend. The two girls had known each other since middle school, and their friendship was close, but there had always been a rivalry between them. "School just has always been my priority." Miranda looked away defensively. "Besides, boys don't seem to like girls who are smarter than they are. And I'll remind you, you're the one struggling in pre-calc, even if you do have Tony." Veronica said nothing, only smirking from the other end of the table. "Whatever, let's get this done," Miranda said brusquely. "Mom and Samantha are coming home from the recital in a couple of hours." Opening her pre-calculus textbook and reaching for her notes, she looked down at the papers with renewed focus. "Have you ever heard of Creepy Jane?" That was how it had all begun. Veronica had slumped in her chair, a physical expression of her disinterest in solving more math problems, her thin lips curved into a mischievous grin. "Isn't that your aunt?" Miranda said without looking up from her textbook. "No, silly. Creepy Jane is what they call an urban legend, a story about some tragedy or some monster that no one can prove is real. But the story gets spread around anyway. But this one is real, believe me." Miranda stopped leafing through her notes and glared at Veronica. "Do you want to pass this class or not?" Veronica sat up in her chair, and her smile vanished. "Okay, just let me tell you this one story and then we can get back to work. Is it a deal?" Intrigued, despite her better judgment, Miranda nodded silently. Veronica was a middling student, but she was quite creative and imaginative when the occasion presented itself. Veronica looked away from the kitchen table, wrinkling her brow and pursing her lips. When she turned to face Miranda again, her eyes were piercing, holding a curious expression of genuine fear. "Jane was a high school girl who lived many years ago, in the 1960s or something. Was mercilessly bullied by her classmates. She was awkward, with clunky glasses and braces on her teeth. Homely to begin with, but with looks made worse by having no style and no social skills. Jane had always been an outcast, but her abuse by the others reached a whole new level when she started high school. A group of mean girls a few grades ahead gave her the nickname Creepy Jane, and it stuck. One day, after being humiliated by these girls in front of the morning assembly, she went into the girls' restroom and ate rat poison, the entire box, which she had taken from the janitor's closet. A teacher found her dead in one of the stalls after she didn't show up for her afternoon class, her face horribly twisted and discolored. Soon after, those 6 girls who had bullied her the worst started to die or disappear one by one. Rumor had it that Creepy Jane's face would appear in their bathroom mirrors before each of them died or vanished, wearing that dreadful death mask the French teacher had found etched on her face. Within just months, all of the girls were either dead or gone, never to be found. Miranda swallowed despite herself, fighting off a tingling feeling creeping up her spine. The legend says that if a girl sits in a dark bathroom with a lit candle, stares into the mirror, and asks for Jane, she might just receive a reply from the spirit world. Veronica said, "Jane might be friendly, or she might not. That's the risk you take to know the future." Miranda stared at Veronica incredulously, the fingers of her right hand searching for a pencil. Veronica was quiet for a moment, and then became insistent. "Really, just stare into the mirror and ask for Jane. Wait a bit, and then—" Veronica waved as she opened her car door and then took a seat behind the wheel. Miranda stood on the porch steps, considering how much time she had left before Mom and Samantha walked in through the front door. Maybe an hour? More than enough time to find a mirror she could use to summon Creepy Jane. She scoffed to herself at the idea. Miranda sat down on the living room couch, reached for the remote control, turning on the television. She started to watch a reality dating show, the light from the television set flickering in the otherwise dark room. The young female contestant was asking each of the handsome, eligible bachelors a question about themselves. The last question the woman asked before the commercial break was, "Have you ever been in love?" Miranda fidgeted uncomfortably and turned to look over her shoulder at the entrance to the hallway, which ended at the first-floor bathroom's door. Shutting off the television, Miranda walked up the stairs to her mother's bedroom in the now silent house. The spacious room was still cluttered with boxes from their recent move, following her parents' divorce late last year. Mom had taken some things she had found in their new home's attic and kept them here, somewhere in her room. Miranda remembered watching from the hallway outside, as her mom put an ornate hand mirror into the dresser drawer. Buried under layers of clothes in the bottom drawer, the mirror was wrapped in a white linen cloth. Miranda took the looking glass by its handle and held it in front of her. It was surprisingly weighty. The mirror was made of sterling silver and appeared Victorian in origin. It was probably over a century old, with floral flourishes and a beveled edge. Why would Mom have hidden the mirror here instead of just placing it on top of the dresser? Miranda asked herself, perplexed. Near the center of the mirror's backside was the image of a smiling young lady, her long flowing hair framed by a wreath of flowers. Miranda decided such an antique object would be perfect for a séance with the spirit world. What better than the possession of some English lass now long dead? Returning downstairs, Miranda took a candle in a small jar and a box of matches from the kitchen cupboard. She lit the candle on the bathroom sink countertop and then sat on a shaggy bath mat, squinting in the poor light and the mirror's round surface. "This is crazy," Miranda thought, nearly standing to put the mirror away in a drawer. Instead, her eyes searched the bathroom, glancing at the nylon shower curtain and the colorful bath towels hanging on the rack nearby. She took a deep breath and looked into the mirror once again. "Jane?" Miranda said quietly, a nervous tremble in her voice. Nothing.
Jane?
Miranda said a second time, almost whispering.
Jane, will I meet my future husband at school?
Silence. The candle's flame flickered in its jar, and the room grew darker for the briefest moment. Miranda's head turned quickly. She thought she'd heard a girl's laughter, and then a soft sigh, but the sound had faded instantly. A shape began to form within the mirror's frame. Miranda swallowed as she leaned forward, trying to make out its details. It was a person's face, but its features were too indistinct to tell who it might be. Slowly, the face of a girl came into hazy focus, smiling. Sharon shook, her tears unending, her face buried in the wet palms of her hands. She heaved and gasped on the front steps of her home, her anguish palpable. A young police officer stood nearby, waiting for her to stop crying, if only for a moment.
Here, Mrs. Ortiz, please take 2 of these with water,
the officer said, calmly proffering 2 tablets in a packet and a foam cup.
Swallow them, then try to breathe normally, through your nose instead of your mouth. You may have a panic attack if you don't. I can't. I need to just sit here,
Sharon managed, looking up at the officer through red, swollen eyes.
I can't go back inside the house.
The officer nodded, her face a mask of understanding.
You won't need to, Mrs. Ortiz. A squad car will bring you and your daughter to the police station. A detective can take both of your statements there.
Sharon tore open the small paper package and tossed the tablets into her mouth before drinking. Several police cruisers were parked on the neighborhood street, their rolling lights flashing over the exterior of the house in the nighttime darkness. An ambulance had pulled up in the driveway. 2 paramedics were wheeling a covered gurney towards it. Sharon's mind swam. She dropped the empty cup on the wooden step, which was the only thing she could really feel at this moment. In body and in soul, Sharon was numb everywhere. Her eldest daughter, her beloved Miranda, was gone, strangled to death on the bathroom floor of their home. The police officer helped Sharon to her feet and eased her aside as the paramedics passed them, the gurney rattling behind. They lifted it up the steps and disappeared into the house. Sharon heard a police body bag being zipped open and almost retched. She turned her back on the scene and walked towards her daughter, Samantha. Samantha was speaking to a second police officer under the front lawn's tall, sheltering oak tree, who was hastily jotting notes down on a pad.
Like I said, the front door and the bathroom door were both locked when we came home. Officer William and his partner had to force the bathroom door open with some tools after we called 911. That's when we found Miranda.
Dried tears stained Samantha's face, but she had held her composure throughout the emergency call, and even during the discovery of Miranda's body. Miranda's throat had been crushed, as if with great force. Sharon imagined her daughter being strangled by some large and powerful escaped lunatic. The officer put away his notepad and studied Samantha for a moment, wondering whether there might be more to this incident than the young girl was telling him.
There are no signs of forced entry either,
he said, offering Samantha another tissue from his shirt pocket.
Officer Williams searched both floors of the house, and the windows and doors are secure. You confirmed, too, that nothing appears to have been stolen.
The police officer briefly looked away to scan the house and then met Samantha's gaze.
The only person who may have seen Miranda tonight, other than you and your mother, is Veronica Peters, her classmate at University High School. Is that right?
Samantha saw her mother walking towards them.
That's right. Veronica and Miranda were supposed to study for finals tonight. Please call her parents and make sure Veronica made it back. I've got her number here somewhere.
The paramedics wheeled Miranda's corpse out on the covered gurney and loaded it into the back of the waiting ambulance. Neither Sharon nor Samantha looked on as the paramedics did their work. Both were still haunted by the nearly indescribable expression of horror on Miranda's face, her blood-saturated eyes staring up at the bathroom ceiling. The police officer ushered Samantha and her mother back toward the house. Grim business indeed. He glanced again through the squad car's window at the clear evidence bag slung on the back seat. A strange, antique mirror caught his eye, almost seeming to stare back at him.
Yes, we've moved back in for now. No, I don't think we'll sell, especially if you say there's a chance a new lead might turn up. Thank you, Detective. I'll stop by the station sometime for the mirror if you don't need to hold on to it any longer. It's quite a valuable heirloom. It belonged to the house's original owner. Thank you.
Sharon hung up the phone and turned to Samantha.
Your sister's case has been closed,
she said quietly.
Detective Sherman says the department still has no solid leads. They're assuming it's a random killing at this point. The case is cold unless new evidence comes to light.
She put a hand over her mouth, took a shaky breath as she searched Samantha's face for a reaction. Samantha stood from her chair at the kitchen table and hugged her mother, the two embracing in silence for several long moments. Finally, Sharon gently pushed Samantha away and said in a reassuring voice,
We can keep hoping that something comes up, but we need to get on with our lives.
Looking away with a pained expression, she added,
But your father won't be of any help to us. I haven't heard from him since the funeral. We don't need him. Dad's going to start a new family now that he's moved out of the state. He'll just forget about us. Just you watch. Your father's wandering eye and other body parts are why we divorced to begin with.
Sharon said, forcing a laugh. Playing along, Samantha grinned, but the truth was that both she and her mother felt uneasy about moving back into the house. The police had spent days collecting forensic evidence, and the crime scene cleanup had been completed by a private company. It was technically all ready for them to move back in, but to Samantha, it all felt too soon. Neither she nor her mother was superstitious, but Miranda's death had been so violent, it was enough to threaten anyone's peace of mind. Detective Sherman had warned them that the killer was likely still out there and may even return. He ordered an increase in the number of neighborhood police patrols as a precaution. The autopsy had found that only a hulking man with incredible physical strength could have caused Miranda's injuries. Yet curiously, there were no marks or even fingerprints on Miranda's throat. The killer may have wrapped a towel around her neck before strangling her, but no towel with evidence of the crime was found, and none were missing from the bathroom. And Miranda's face, well, no one could forget such a frightful visage. That Saturday, Samantha drove her mother's sedan to the local shopping mall to purchase some school supplies. Sharon's car now conspicuously displayed a sign stating "Student Driver," which was visible from both the front and the rear of the vehicle. Samantha parked near the movie theater, walked through a revolving glass door into the mall's lobby, hurrying past the shops that lined the main thoroughfare. Samantha stopped onto the escalator. The office supply store was right at the top. The woman behind the cash register smiled pleasantly at Samantha as she put her notebooks and other supplies into a plastic bag.
Summer's almost over. Are you excited to be going back to school? Sort of. I'll be glad to be out of the house,
Samantha answered, looking past the woman to the shops on the opposite side of the mall's second floor. She spotted Miranda's old friend, Veronica, folding sweaters and shelving them on a display in the front window of a clothing store. Samantha picked up her bag and hurried across the concourse, weaving through the shoppers passing her by.
I didn't know you worked here,
Samantha said, stopping at the window display. Veronica turned and seemed surprised. She put down the cotton sweater she was holding and managed a half smile.
Samantha, hi. How are things coming along? I haven't seen you since Miranda's funeral back in April.
Samantha was immediately taken aback by how fatigued Veronica appeared. There were bluish dark circles under her eyes and fine creases around her mouth.
Mom and I moved back into the house this week,
she replied.
I'm getting ready for the school year. We're trying to get back to normal, but it's hard. You're not afraid to live there after what happened?
Veronica said, with legitimate concern. She then looked over her shoulder as if searching for a manager. Or perhaps Samantha thought suddenly someone else who might be watching them.
We don't have much of a choice, really. Mom just bought the house. We'd have to sell it at a huge loss. Miranda's death was on the news for like a whole week.
Samantha gave a deflated sigh.
Every real estate agent would tell their buyers about what happened. The house is a no-sell.
Veronica nodded weakly. Samantha couldn't get over it. The girl had utterly changed since Miranda's burial service several months ago. Veronica seemed not only tired, but truly exhausted, almost entirely drained of her usual good humor and vitality. She seemed now a liminal figure, as if steadily fading away from the daylight and into the shadows.
I don't want to sound crazy, but do you believe in ghosts?
Veronica's smile persisted, but Samantha could tell she was quite serious. Samantha stiffened.
No, I don't. Neither does Mom. Living in a murder house is a bit spooky, but dead is dead.
Veronica's eyes suddenly darted left and right as Samantha uttered this last phrase.
Mom keeps the first-floor bathroom shut tight, but only because we don't want to use it.
Samantha continued.
It's too painful for us right now. Maybe someday we'll open it back up, but not anytime soon. I believe in ghosts,
Veronica said softly.
I do. Veronica, is something wrong? I mean, are you sick or something? No, why would you say that?
Veronica forced a wider smile and hopped slightly, a feeble attempt to perk herself up.
You just seem different from when I saw you last, like you're not getting enough rest. Just a bit worried about starting college next month,
Veronica said, waving a hand dismissively.
Excited and worried. Sleep has taken a back seat to getting ready for my first semester away from home.
Veronica looked away again, as if afraid to say more.
I have to get going,
Samantha said slowly, backing away.
School is starting for me too. My junior year at uni high.
Samantha snickered nervously.
I bet you won't miss that place.
Veronica changed the subject instead of answering.
Do you believe the police have any leads? Or is it pretty much done?
She seemed hopeful now, more engaged than she had been for much of their conversation.
It looks like it's done,
Samantha answered.
Whoever did it needs to be caught, but the police have nothing to go on. They even took that funny mirror Mom kept in her room as evidence, but found no fingerprints other than Miranda's. You said a mirror? What kind of mirror?
Veronica instantly became animated, her deadened eyes widening.
An old hand mirror, it's some antique that came with the house,
Samantha said as she furtively glanced at her wristwatch.
Our agent told us only one other family lived in the house between us and the original builders, a married couple with 4 boys. The family left everything in the attic alone. Even though they knew some of the things stored there were probably collector's items.
Veronica fell into silence. A few customers passed by them as the girls conversed, but none interrupted.
When we were studying that night, before I left, I told Miranda about creepy Jane.
Veronica now seemed on the verge of tears. Samantha frowned.
Who or what is creepy Jane? I told Miranda it was an urban legend, but it was just a story I made up on the spot,
Veronica said, sniffling as she wiped a closed eye with her fingers.
I wanted to scare her a bit, just for fun. But she may have tried what I told her to do. You told her to look into a mirror. Not just that, but to call for Jane while gazing into the mirror in a dark bathroom. Don't use the bathroom mirror, I said. Light a candle, and then call for creepy Jane. Ask Jane if she'll find you a husband while staring into the mirror.
Veronica managed a small smile as she recited the instructions.
It's nonsense, of course, but something might have gone wrong. I never told the police when they questioned me because I didn't think it was important. I doubt that mirror has anything to do with it,"
Samantha countered.
"The bathroom door was locked from the inside. That's the part the police detective couldn't figure out. They don't know how the killer got in there in the first place."
Veronica shivered, pulled at her button-down sweater.
"I'd move out if I were you,"
she said in a hollow voice.
"You shouldn't stay in that house. It's not safe for you and your mom."
Samantha was unshaken by this revelation about her sister's death.
"The mirror is just an old mirror, Veronica,"
she offered.
"Miranda probably wanted to store it away in the bathroom drawer when she was attacked. Or whatever happened."
Veronica hugged Samantha tightly and said,
"I'll see you at Christmas when I get back from school. Take care of yourself. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine."
Bemused, Samantha walked toward the escalator and briefly wondered if she should examine that odd silver mirror once Mom retrieved it from the police station.
"Why would Veronica fill your head with a crazy story like that? I'm not surprised, though. I always thought that the girl was a liar."
Becca sat with Samantha and their friends at the picnic table, interjecting right after Samantha finished her tale.
"Creepy Jane sounds about as real as Veronica's bust line,"
Becca declared, her manner as mocking as ever. Lily and Ava snorted with laughter as Samantha shifted uncomfortably. Becca had called late in the afternoon and suggested that she and the girls hang out at the park near Samantha's house that evening. School would start again in a few weeks, and everyone wanted to savor the last vestiges of warm summer weather before they had to once again spend all day sitting in a classroom.
It's so strange. Why would Miranda have had Mom's hand mirror with her, unless she was really trying to contact Creepy Jane? There's a light vanity mirror above the sink. If she were combing her hair or something, she would have used the bathroom's mirror.
Samantha looked around at her friends, genuinely worried that the circumstances of Miranda's death could be even more bizarre than anyone had previously imagined. The small public park was mostly empty. Only a few couples and cyclists passed by in the distance. Becca smiled, reached across the picnic table to touch Samantha's hand reassuringly.
"Veronica may somehow be blaming herself for your sister's death. You said she looked wiped out, like she's not getting enough sleep. Maybe she's remembering things that never really happened."
Samantha examined the youthful faces of the girls, all of whom she had known since childhood.
"What do they think of me now?"
Samantha considered. There had been an outpouring of sympathy from her classmates and neighbors following Miranda's murder, but there was, she knew, a limit to any grieving period. Samantha had been hesitant to share what she had been told by Veronica, but she needed to tell someone of her fears, her growing suspicion that something very peculiar had occurred that night.
"I have an idea. Let's break into the school and see if Creepy Jane shows up in the restroom mirror when we call for her. Then we'll know if Veronica is telling the truth or if it really is just an urban legend."
Jumping up from her seat on the bench, Becca smiled at the other girls in the receding twilight.
"It'll be some wicked fun before we're sent off into slavery again."
She clapped her hands together with glee as she spoke.
"You're an idiot. We'll be caught and suspended before school even starts. Sit back down or go home."
Ava shook her head, exasperated.
"This Creepy Jane is an urban legend. There's nothing to it,"
she said scornfully.
"I've climbed through one of the pool building's windows before with Aaron Rodgers,"
Becca said slyly.
"We went swimming at night and then escaped through the side door near the offices. That old janitor Carl is too careless to lock everything up, especially the windows."
Becca began to walk towards her waiting SUV and waved at her friends to follow her.
"I'm going, even if none of you are,"
she said over her shoulder, passing the sand-covered playground near the picnic tables.
"If there's nothing to it, then at least we'll get to go for a swim in the pool."
Lily stood up and followed Becca without saying anything, but had only become engaged when Becca announced her plans for a midnight swim. Ava looked over at Samantha, who glanced at her, smiled apologetically, and then stood up to follow Becca. Rolling her eyes, Ava followed.
"Hold my flashlight, will you?"
Becca said, thrusting it to Lily as she crouched near the window.
"I'll climb through."
Becca dropped her compact gym bag onto the grass in front of her before pulling the frame of the large, partially open awning window outward, its ill-maintained hinges creaking. The crank window's stiff hinges held in place, allowing Becca to squeeze under the frame and carefully drop down onto the pool room's blue-tiled floor. Standing at the edge of the full-length swimming pool, Becca looked around and then motioned for Lily to throw her gym bag through. Becca bent over to pick up her bag and then walked behind the diving board, pushing open the door to the girls' locker room. The reflection of the dimmed ceiling lights on the water sent a kaleidoscope of rippling shapes spinning across the tiled walls of the pool room. Lily turned to Ava and Samantha, who were standing watch behind her, and whispered,
"Come on. Becca said to wait by the coach's office."
The three girls walked around the length of the school natatorium and found the path to the building's side door. They then waited patiently in the dark for Becca to appear. Soon the metal door clicked and then slowly opened. Becca was standing in front of them in a one-piece swimsuit, beaming from ear to ear.
"Get inside, someone might see you,"
she breathed hurriedly.
"I'm gonna do some laps around the pool before we try our phone call to the dead."
Samantha closed the door behind them, followed the girls down an unlit hallway past several locked offices and into the pool room. Becca lowered herself into the chlorinated water, attempting not to make too much noise. She did a few laps and then swam in broad circles, drifting through the water on her back as she paddled with her arms. Lily sat on one of the wooden benches placed against the walls and took off her sneakers and socks. She stripped down to her underwear and stepped into the pool, dropping down into the water with an audible plop and vanishing beneath its surface. She bobbed up a moment later and grinned, pushing back her long wet hair with her hands. Ava and Samantha took seats on a wooden bench at the opposite side of the pool, watching Becca and Lily eagerly muck about. After a short while, Samantha glanced at Ava, and two of them stood and walked towards the girls' locker room. Samantha purposely left the lights off as they entered to not risk attracting the attention of Carl the janitor. Becca had set down her gym bag on one of the benches, dividing two rows of metal lockers. Samantha easily found the neon-colored bag, even in the semi-dark. The locker room was deathly quiet, with only the distant sound of splashing breaking the silence.
"Becca said she put a candle and matches from the SUV's compartment in here,"
Samantha noted as she unzipped the bag's top and began to fish around inside.
"Her dad insists she keep an emergency candle with a box of matches in the SUV in case of a blizzard." "There hasn't been snow in the Central Valley in probably 10 years. "You're right. But she goes skiing with her family up in the mountains. You never know when a candle might come in handy."
Samantha unscrewed the circular lid and saw that 3 wicks were embedded in the candle's wax surface. She placed the open tin on the grooved rail running beneath the bench's wall-mounted mirror. Ava looked over her shoulder, catching Samantha's eyes in the mirror.
"Sam?"
she said hastily.
The splashing stopped.
Samantha listened.
"They must be out of the pool. Go grab them so we can do this. The longer we stay, the more we're pushing our luck." "But this is the real thrill, right?"
Ava replied, her smirking face only faintly visible.
"See you in a moment."
As Ava left, the locker room door creaked open and then closed with a thud. Samantha looked around in the dark, not truly afraid, but beginning to feel a chill. The door to the locker room opened again.
"Ava?"
she called. No response, no footsteps, Nothing but the sound of the door swinging shut. There was a dark shape standing at the end of the lockers, watching her. Samantha squinted.
Yes, Ava, very funny. Come on, where are the others?
The figure moved across the open space between the rows of lockers, disappearing behind them. Samantha swallowed. She rubbed her hands over her forearms, slowly stepped forward to peer around the edge. Nothing was there. The chill in the air had become more pronounced. Then, movement out of the corner of her eye. Samantha spun and caught a glimpse of the back of a girl's head, long tresses flowing as she disappeared through the now open locker room door. As the door swung closed, it was almost immediately pushed open from the outside. Ava, Lily, and Becca stepped into view, giggling amongst themselves. Samantha faced them, saw that Lily and Becca had wrapped towels around their midsections. Lily was grasping their clothes and the collars of her sneakers with both hands.
Hey, let's get this done. Light that candle,
Becca said, coming to a stop in front of the face-level rectangular mirror.
We'll be dried off soon.
Samantha blinked and put a hand over her throat as she turned to light the candle, beginning to wonder if she should mention the uncanny figure she'd seen. She paused. Certainly, if someone had really walked through that door, her friends would have noticed. Veronica's paranoia is finally getting to me, she thought, pushing the notion away. The four girls lined up in front of a locker room mirror, reflections of their shadowy faces smiling in the soft candlelight.
This is like one of those dead teenager movies,
Becca gasped sardonically.
Let's hope nothing is in here stalking us. Don't say that,
Samantha scolded in a coarse whisper.
We'll all ask for Jane at once, and then repeat it at least 10 times. I'll start, and then all of you join in right away.
The others nodded.
Jane,
Samantha said in a low voice as she gazed into the long mirror. The others chimed in almost simultaneously.
Jane,
they said, Becca and Lily smiling broadly as they intoned the ghost's name.
Jane, are you there, Jane? Please answer us,
Samantha said. By their 12th attempt, her voice had grown pleading.
Nothing's gonna happen. Let's go before we get caught,
Becca said with some relief. She reached down for her gym bag, pulled out her jeans and t-shirt. Just then, a gust of air passed over the flames of the melting candle, its fires dancing briefly. For a moment, Samantha could see the outline of a small, blurred shape coming into focus within the depths of the mirror. A door slammed open outside in the pool room. The sound of a mop bucket on wheels being pushed over the tiled floor cuts through the silence.
It's Carl! Put out the light!
Becca said as she snuffed the candle's flames between her fingertips. Lily grabbed her clothes from the bench and wadded them into Becca's bag. This done, the two of them quickly slipped on their sneakers. Becca dropped the spent candle into a plastic trash barrel.
There's an open window in here somewhere. I definitely felt a breeze when we first walked in.
Hurrying to the back of the dark locker room, Becca spied an open awning window above the sinks and toilet stalls. She waved the other girls over.
Stand on me and then pull me up last,
Becca whispered, half enjoying the prospect of being caught. Ava nodded, clambered up Becca's braced body and placed her feet on the taller girl's athletic shoulders. Panting, Ava slipped through the window, followed by Lily, with Becca's gym bag, and then, lastly, Samantha. The wheels of the mop cart had grown loud, and the door to the locker room abruptly flung open, bright light shining onto the rows of locker units. Lily and Samantha grabbed Becca's arms as she flailed desperately on the tips of her sneakers, and then pulled her roughly through the crevice under the window's pane. They ran over the nighttime grounds of the school natatorium toward the parking lot. Breathing hard, the girls piled through the car's unlocked doors, Becca quickly starting the engine. In an instant, they were pulling out towards the lot's exit and the street beyond.
"Whew, that was close,"
Becca shouted as they rode off, all smiles at their getaway.
"But admit it was loads of fun, too. Just don't tell anyone, at least not this semester."
Samantha looked out the backseat window of the sleek SUV as her friends talked and laughed, the late-night summer breeze blowing about her as they drove past tracks of suburban homes.
"Did I really see something in the mirror?"
Samantha worried, an uneasiness gripping her. Or was it all just nerves? Placing a small stack of books on the library table in front of her, Samantha seated herself and took a deep breath, mentally preparing to dive into the volume at the top of the pile. Urban Myths and Legends, a hardcover book by some author she had never heard of. The books were mostly older, some several decades old, but these worn texts were all she'd been able to find in the local library's catalog database. A quick internet search earlier had revealed almost nothing about Creepy Jane except a few creepy pastas, none of which identified Creepy Jane by name. The books Samantha had pulled from the library shelves turned out to contain much more detail, but still made no mention of an urban legend centered around a dead girl called Creepy Jane. Over hours, Samantha read stories about some creature named the Slender Man, ghostly hitchhikers, black-eyed children. This one really scared her. An axe murderer dubbed the Bunny Man, and various tales of gateways to hell, hidden in abandoned buildings, hotel rooms, and other out-of-the-way places. But no Creepy Jane. Had Veronica been telling the truth about making the story up? Or had she lied to cover something up? Samantha sighed. She could never tell with Veronica. Like Becca said, the girl was a liar. You never did know with her. But something stood out in Samantha's memory of that night that continued to push her to question the events surrounding Miranda's death. As the police report recorded, there had been no sign of forced entry, no unidentified fingerprints anywhere. The bathroom door had been locked from the inside. Each of these occurrences were hard to explain, but taken together, they were very strange indeed. There was something else, too, half buried in the back of Samantha's mind. Officer William pressed his ear against the bathroom door a second time, hoping against hope that Miranda might answer him. After a moment, he reached into a heavy bag at his feet and removed a metal implement and a sledgehammer. His colleague, Officer Sanchez, stepped up, wedged the two-pronged fork at the implement's head between the door and its frame, then stepped aside as Officer Williams struck it with the hammer. The sharp points of the head drove deep into the door's narrow gap, forming a wedge. Both officers leveraged their weight against the entry's tool handle, prying the bathroom door open with a crack. Samantha rushed past the two men and stood over her sister. Miranda was sprawled on her back on the tile floor. Light from the hallway spilled over the dead body and glinted off a silver mirror lying face up next to the corpse. Samantha glanced down into the mirror's surface and saw someone staring back at her. "Samantha, step away! Outside now!" Officer Williams reached over and grabbed Samantha's arm, leading her out of the bathroom. "Stay with your mother," he said. When he returned, Officer Sanchez was checking Miranda for vital signs. The events of that night jumbled together in Samantha's mind. At first, she'd dismissed what she had seen as a trick of the light, had convinced herself that the face was her own, somehow distorted. But that face, it hadn't been a normal face. It was the face of someone evil. Samantha's phone vibrated on the wood laminate table, pulling her attention back to the present moment. Mom was calling her, probably about the car. It was already early afternoon and Mom had wanted to do some shopping before the weekend. I'll just let it go to voicemail, Samantha thought absent-mindedly. What if it's our house? A chill crept over Samantha. Pulling up a browser on her phone, she hurriedly searched records of their town's past for anything tragic. When nothing came up, she searched for her address, and before long, she found something. More than a half-century ago, another murder took place near the grounds of their new home, also involving a young girl. The girl had been strangled to death. The website mentioned the area surrounding their house had once been an apple orchard, with the house the only residence for several miles. Olivia Radcliffe was the murdered girl's name. She'd been the 14-year-old daughter of Helen Radcliffe, a well-to-do widow. Mrs. Radcliffe regularly hired an immigrant named Giuseppe Rossini as a gardener and to pick apples in the orchard. Giuseppe spoke little English. He was grateful for the work. Mrs. Radcliffe arrived home one summer afternoon to find Olivia missing. She searched the orchard and discovered Olivia among the rows of its flowering apple trees, bleeding from her temple. There had been a struggle, and someone had strangled her until she died. The police were quick to blame Mr. Rossini, who had neither an alibi nor the funds for a proper legal defense. An investigation into Mr. Rossini's past found he had attempted assault on a teenage girl in his home country before fleeing to avoid prosecution. The trial jury convicted him only on circumstantial evidence, and Mr. Rossini was executed by hanging soon after. Samantha slowly scrolled through the website's article and examined the embedded black and white photographs of Mrs. Radcliffe and Olivia. Olivia was very beautiful, wore a wide-brimmed straw hat and summer dress, outstretched hand resting on the branch of an apple tree. But there was something quite disturbing about the picture itself. The longer Samantha looked at the girl in the photo, the more she was taken by an unnatural coldness in the girl's aspect. Outwardly, she was lovely, but there was something terribly cruel about the way she gazed back at the camera, or at whoever had taken that picture. Stranger still was Olivia's resemblance to herself. The girl could have been Samantha's long-lost sister from another era. The two were so similar in appearance.
I'm so glad you called ahead. Visitor hours are almost done for today. But how did you find Mrs. Radcliffe's address?
The young nurse led Samantha down a long hallway at the convalescent home, turning to smile at her intermittently.
It wasn't hard,
Samantha said.
Almost everyone's address is somewhere on the internet, if you know where to look.
She glanced at her wristwatch. It was late afternoon. She had left her phone in the car. She was certain Mom would call her again.
Mrs. Radcliffe is our community's only centenarian. She's been here for I don't know how many years. You're the first guest she had seen since I started here.
The nurse stopped in the open doorway to the visitor's lounge and briefly gestured toward a very aged woman, slouched in a wheelchair. The old woman looked down at the floor, seeming not to notice Samantha and the nurse's presence. The nurse continued to speak in a quiet, almost sympathetic voice as the two watched Mrs. Radcliffe from the doorway.
She's nearly blind now, just so you know, but she still has her faculties. You can visit with her here in the lounge. It'll be empty except for the two of you.
The nurse approached Mrs. Radcliffe's wheelchair and leaned over to speak into her ear.
Mrs. Radcliffe, this is your visitor, Samantha. She says she lives in your old house now with her mother.
Mrs. Radcliffe looked up in Samantha's direction, her sightless eyes dull and opaque.
Yes, Samantha, please sit down in front of me so I can better hear you.
Her voice still held some strength, even though her body was clearly failing.
I hope you find what you need for your summer project. I'll be back in 30 minutes.
The nurse walked away casually, partially closing the door to the lounge behind her as she left. The old woman wobbled her head, as if trying to get her bearings before she spoke.
You live in my house on Rosewood Lane. Is that what you want to talk about?
Mrs. Radcliffe seemed calm, but there was a hint of apprehension in her tone.
Yes. There's a silver hand mirror my mother found in the attic. I think it may have belonged to your daughter, Olivia.
Samantha studied Mrs. Radcliffe's blotted and wrinkled face, thinking back to the photograph of her as a young woman. Mrs. Radcliffe continued to move her head back and forth, but said nothing. After a long moment, she said,
Olivia, what do you know of my daughter?
Visibly agitated, a pallor of fear began to spread over the old woman's already ashen complexion.
There's an image of a smiling girl wearing flowers in her hair on its back,
Samantha explained.
Did you give that mirror to Olivia?
No,
Mrs. Radcliffe replied forcefully.
The mirror was mine when I was a girl, a gift from my own mother. Olivia would take it from my room and admire herself for hours. What a vain child she was.
Samantha waited a moment and then said,
I think Olivia may be trying to contact us from the afterlife.
She leaned forward in the lounge chair after she spoke, waiting to hear Mrs. Radcliffe's reaction to her claim about the supernatural. Mrs. Radcliffe again sat in silence, her head wobbling about. When she replied to Samantha, her raised voice was scalding, her words sharp and acerbic.
Olivia was born wicked. I could see the cruelty in her from early on. But her wickedness grew worse as she began to reach womanhood.
Mrs. Radcliffe's brow furrowed, as if she were in great pain.
Animals would go missing from the neighbor's farm. Then one day, a young boy vanished. Olivia said he had run away, but his body was later dredged up from the woods nearby. His body was. I found Olivia alone in the orchard. Her back was to me, standing among the trees, not yet ready for the fall harvest. As she turned, she held something clenched in her hand. I struck Olivia across the head with the butt of an axe I'd found in our shed, wrapped in rags. Dried blood on its blade and on its handle. Olivia fell and I knelt down to choke my daughter for what she had done. She fought. Oh, how she fought. Then, finally, her evil life was choked out of her.
Samantha sat motionless in the chair, stunned by this almost involuntary confession. Mrs. Radcliffe gazed directly at Samantha, her thin brows arched, her milk-white eyes narrowing as if attempting to focus. With a fierceness belying her frail appearance, Mrs. Radcliffe suddenly reached forth with a bony hand and gripped Samantha's wrist, holding her fast.
But evil never truly dies,
the old woman breathed.
Evil will always find a way to continue on if it can.
The old woman closed her eyes under heavy lids, sank back into her wheelchair, exhausted. She released her grasp on Samantha's arm. Samantha stood, eyes wide, and hurried away to find the nurse. Samantha leaned against the open car door, rubbing her tender wrist. Her phone now showed 2 voicemail messages from Mom.
I'll listen to them while I'm driving back,
Samantha thought, contritely.
Mom must be pissed by now.
As she pulled out of the parking lot, the first voicemail played from the phone's speakers.
Hello, Sam. This is Mom. You're still not back from the library. I'm going to step out with Veronica Peters' mother, Carol. She called me and said Veronica has serious insomnia, can't sleep. Carol thinks it has something to do with Miranda, but Veronica won't say. Talk to you soon.
Samantha deleted the first voicemail with her free hand as she drove, and then let the second message play.
Hello, Sam. This is Mom again. Hope you're okay. I'm back from coffee with Carol. She's really upset. She's afraid Veronica won't start college in a few weeks and doesn't know what to do. Carol also dropped by the police station with me on the way home, and I picked up my mirror from evidence. Talk to you soon.
Samantha took a deep breath and began to drive faster along the expressway. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the waning summer sun was setting below the horizon, casting long shadows from the nearby trees over their home. The front door was unlocked. Samantha stepped into the silent house and closed the door behind her.
Mom? Are you there?
Samantha called out.
I'm sorry I didn't call you back. I took another trip after the library.
She put her phone down on the kitchen table and looked around.
I really need to see that mirror you brought back with you.
She called out again.
It's important.
Samantha turned the corner into the dim hallway, the last light of the day falling through the living room windows onto the rug. The bathroom door at the end of the hall was cracked open, a flickering light coming from inside the otherwise dark space. Samantha stopped.
Mom?
The bathroom door swung open and Sharon hurtled from the darkness, grabbing Samantha by the throat. Mother and daughter tumbled onto the hardwood floor. Sharon's icy cold hands violently clutching Samantha in a vice-like grip. Her eyes bulging with madness, Sharon tightened her stranglehold, a manic gape-mouthed grin on her face, pinned on her back. Samantha's mouth fell open as she struggled to swallow one more breath. The image of her mother above her, hands around her throat, grew blurry as darkness closed in.
Hello? There's a medical emergency at 1211 Rosewood Lane. My mother had a heart attack.
Ma'am, is there any response?
She's not No, she's not responding to me.
Can you tell us what happened?
I'm sorry, I can't tell. Please send an ambulance.
Samantha put her phone down on the kitchen table. She stepped over Sharon's body in the hallway and walked into the bathroom, flipping on the light switch. The silver mirror lay on the bathroom rug, its glass surface unmarred and intact. Samantha touched the mirror fondly and then admired her own reflection, tucking a loose lock of blonde hair behind an ear, then wrapping the antique piece in its white linen cloth. She placed it at the bottom of the dresser drawer for safekeeping.